welcome to Crossing Bridges. Ladies and gentlemen, today my guest is the spiritual leader of Pasadena Jewish Temple and Center, Rabbi Joshua Grader. I'm delighted to have him as my guest because he truly is not only a wonderful rabbi serving the community, but as well as being involved in many other areas of the world, trying to combat hunger, starvation, as well as working for peace and harmony. Today, you will have an opportunity to learn more about Rabbi Grader, as well as his activities that I just mentioned. At this time, it's my pleasure to welcome Rabbi Grader to the show. Joshua, thank you so much for being on my show. It's an honor to have you.
Thanks, Nat. It's a pleasure to be here.
My pleasure. I want for the viewing audience, just briefly to get to know a little bit better about who you are. I have the pleasure of knowing you, but I wanted to come from you. Take us back to where you came from and to present and the family and so forth. You'd be so kind.
Sure. I've been in Pasadena now 11 years as the rabbi at Pasadena Jewish Temple and Center. I grew up in Woodland Hills in the San Fernando Valley. I moved there when I was 10 years old. I grew up there, went to school there, went to a small college over on the west side at American Jewish University now. It was University of Judaism at the time, Lee College, and that's where I met my wife, Francie. We've been married 18 years. We have two wonderful children, twins, 12 years old. This is a nice setting. When I was in high school, I did television. We had a television news station, so I was active in that. That was the first career path I thought I was going to have, is either in television, and then when I was in college, I actually worked in radio, worked for a radio station here in Los Angeles, and then kind of made this decision to go the spiritual route, and went to Jewish Theological Seminary in New York City, 6 years of rabbinical school. During that time, I lived in Israel for 1 year. And then worked at a very large synagogue in Manhattan as an assistant rabbi. Had my own small synagogue in upstate New York for 3 years, and then I came here to Pasadena.
Well, we're delighted to have you. You brought a lot of joy to so many millions of people. Truly, I mean that, because you're actively involved not only in your temple, but as well as in the community. You write in Huffington Post on a regular basis. And I'd like to expand, as I indicated, about your role in the community and in other countries that you have been involved actively about overcoming hunger. If you expand on that, I would be really grateful to you, and how people who are watching today, they can work with you or organizations that are trying to overcome that.
Specifically on hunger.
Yes, please.
Yeah, well, our synagogue, long before I got here, has been a partner with Union Station here in Pasadena. I really strongly support Rabbi Marv Gross and Union Station, who's doing great work to combat hunger and homelessness in our own city. I really think that's the most important area to work in. I mean, hunger and starvation is one of those issues that it's one of those problems we could solve if we really had the will and the determination and the focus to do it. We have the resources to do it. It's really first time in the history of humanity that we actually have enough food to feed everyone. We're just not distributing it in the best way. So I work with Union Station. I work with a group called the American Jewish World Service, and they do a lot of focus in Africa and in developing countries. Both on our continent in South America, as well as in Africa and in Asia, and then I try to really talk about that, write about that, and we collect food here at our synagogue for Foothill Unity, Friends Indeed, these organizations right here in our community. There's plenty of people hungry right here in Pasadena.
You hear a lot of people and even organizations that try to combat what you are trying to do by saying there are too many people on this planet, which I disagree with. From the standpoint of too many people, that's God's will. You cannot really stop someone from having children, even though if you try to, what's meant to be will be. There are a lot of actions taken in countries such as India, Africa, and other places to minimize having so many children. Even in China, as you know, they are only reduced to having 2 children per couple. And some places are having less right now, and there's a fear of the unbalance between ages, whereas they're going to have too many old people, very few young people, and the gap economically, socially is going to be very difficult for them. But I feel, basically, as you indicated, distribution of food is not done evenly, or there might be some political involved. Because in this country, if I'm right, and correct me if I'm not, every month or every so often, the United States basically replenishes what they have already reserved, and if the so-called canned foods is not marked for a certain date, they throw it away, they don't give it away. Many restaurants and many markets today, they do not give the food to the homeless because of health issue. They throw it away in garbage. So what is really going on?
Right. Those are two interesting points. I don't know how I want to get into the first point about children. I don't know that I agree. More on a sustainability issue. I agree there's a moral and religious, calling to, and as a Jewish person, we have very few people, and there's a calling to have more children, and replenish the tribe, as you will. But I think we do have to worry. There is some sustainability issues around how many people can, approaching 7 billion or over 7 billion people, whether the Earth's resources can sustain that growth. I mean, there's a discussion that just the amount of resources, not outside of food, whether in terms of population areas and density and water and air and the things that we're wrestling with. That's a very sticky issue of whether you can control people. I think there is, listen, our tradition talks about that there is human responsibility, both to have children, that's a top commandment, pru revu, to be fruitful and multiply, but there's also, I think, a social responsibility that's, if you can't afford it, or people having 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 children and they can't afford it, I think there is some responsibility that people can take. But the second point, I think, is really important because I don't like quoting statistics, I don't have them in front of me, but we throw, especially in this country, we throw away enough food to feed the hungry in this country. That there is a waste issue that I think there's a health issue on in terms of restaurants and what can you save, but we have an overabundance of food. And listen, I talked about this in a sermon years ago. There's a challenge after going to other countries, even in Israel, where I've lived twice now, which is not by any means a developing country, but the sense that you go to a supermarket in America, Gelson's, right around the corner, and you have a choice of literally 100 breakfast cereals. Do we really need 100? So. What if we only had, let's just say we had 20? Then how much food is being wasted? We need 25 different toothpastes. We need just the plethora of food that and there's no way to keep it fresh if it's not getting sold. You're right. And so we could donate it and we could give it. And restaurants, there are some great organizations that are going around and collecting food, and Panera Bread, donates extra food, and places are taking social responsibility. But I think as a people, the sense that we deserve to have this many, that we'd have to have a choice as a humanity, as a human society, to say, we don't need 100 breakfast cereals. If that would mean millions of other people could be fed, I'd take 5 choices. I mean, really, how many of them are out there, especially since, more than half of them are rotting our teeth and are affecting our obesity of our children. But that gets into capitalism and how
Absolutely.
we built it up, and if we buy it, then they'll make it.
Your point is very valid, Joshua. The point that bothers me a lot is the distribution of funding in this country. Quite often we waste our resources, our monetary. For example, the 163 prisoners that we brought in from overseas, from Afghanistan, it has cost us thus far over $5 billion to keep them for the past 11 years right now. Well, there's, again, what do we do with them? Why do we bring them here, for example? What is better, feeding the hungry people or keep them in prison? And if the statue keeps running again, you can see the amount. All the waste that we do here in this country truly could provide so much home and shelter. I don't mean you need to take care of everybody, but you need to take care of people who are not able to take care of themselves. People who are really without any of their own fault are homeless. Economic, social affected many of people in this country. And at one time, we were very prosperous. But economically, it hurt a lot of people. And as you can see, even Pasadena, we have over 1,500 homeless people running around every day.
Yeah.
And that's what I think my point of view is, that we are not distributing the funds where it should be.
Yeah, there's there's priorities. I've been doing reading the last few weeks, with President Kennedy's assassination anniversary,
Right.
50th anniversary. So, that was before I was born, just to put it in context for your viewers. But I remember it well the day, because it's my father's birthday, November 22nd. But reading about what he was trying to do, and we don't forget, we throw around the idea of military-industrial complex, that what Eisenhower was starting to say at the end of his presidency, that we need to be careful about how we are building up this connection between the military and industry. And I just read an end of one of President Eisenhower's speeches near the end of his term, where he laid it out very clearly that has been said by a lot of groups today. How many, take one aircraft carrier that costs, I'm making up the number, but $500 million.
Right.
How many, he goes through, how many schools is that? How many roads is that? How many bridges is that? How many after-school programs is that? How many college tuition funds is that? How many, line it up, that we have, we spend on what we think we need to spend it on, and there tends to not be money when it comes to taking care of those in need. And as a religious person, I'm more in favor of taking care of our traditions, and all the traditions that I know of talk about caring for the poor and the hungry and the needy and the widow and the orphan. And we say that, those are great phrases, but they teach us did some leadership development work, and they'll teach you that budgets are moral documents.
Right.
They can be seen as, and what you fund in many ways speaks to where your values are.
I think our priorities in this country really have changed tremendously. And there are too many corporate structure organizations that are only out for wealth, for their own gain.
Yeah.
As we have talked about, how many beds does one person sleeps in at one night?
Right.
How many plates of food do you eat from? How many cars do you drive at the same time?
Right.
And for example, there's so much that we can expand on, and I truly hope that our government and the people who are so influential in this country come to their senses one day and say, enough is enough. We need to spend more time on humanity. We need to spend more time on health, education, and things that helps all of us.
We had a meltdown, just a few years ago, and
That's right.
we had hoped that it was going to be a wake-up with the salaries and the big banks and the Wall Street, and I'm not necessarily against that. I mean, I think there's nothing in Jewish tradition that's is against
Of
wealth,
course not. No.
but that the excessiveness and that it's a system that gets protected. And listen, I think we know that there's a huge problem between politics and money.
Absolutely.
And at least we should know. And it just means that we have to do something about it. Other countries, I think, in this regard, do things a little bit better than we do. And that's not to say there's a real struggle in America as to what does it mean to be a superpower.
Absolutely.
Does that have to mean that we don't learn from other places or learn from our mistakes? There's really a sense of that it's very hard for us to admit mistakes, and in my tradition, that's part of life. It's the healthiest.
This subject is so much vast that it takes days really to study this, but I want to cover many other things. But for your information, average CEO of corporation in this country is earning $12 million a year.
Yeah, 400 or 500 times their worker.
Absolutely. And then the average percentage is of a worker is 1% to them.
Yeah.
1%, like average of about maybe $40,000, $50,000, which is really the unbalanced unfairness. You just came back from Israel about a month and a half ago. You were there for about 6, 7 months. And I'd like to ask you, from the time you were there versus recently, what changes did you see? And I know you have a lot of compassion for peace in the Middle East. Can you expand on those two areas, please?
Yeah, so my family and I had the chance to live in Jerusalem for about almost 5 months, earlier this year. It was a tremendous experience, especially for my children, to see their first time in Israel. You know, Nat, I've been working towards and about and on a Middle East peace for almost 18 years, and plenty of people have been doing it way longer than that. A couple of things I noticed. First of all, from when I was there till now, there's been a tremendous ramp up to try and get talks between Israelis and Palestinians back on track. I really applaud Secretary Kerry and the President for making that a priority. I hope that they are able to stick with it. It's been a rocky road. No president has ever been able to, make this happen to the final degree. A couple of things I noticed in visiting with Israelis, both on in the peace camp and just in the Knesset, in the parliament, and others. For the Israelis, there's a sense of fatigue on trying to make peace. They really feel that they've tried, and in many ways they have, and that have made extensive efforts and oftentimes not met with the same commitment on the Palestinian side. At the same time, the growth of settlements and the rising kind of nationalistic fervor that it worries me on the Israeli side. But there's a sense of a bubble around Israelis that as long as things are quiet and things are calm, that they'll take it. They'll take the status quo, even though that's really untenable in the long run. And as an American Jew and as a religious leader, I try to help. My belief is to help support and love Israel with honesty and with truth. And sometimes as friends, we have to say things that might be a little challenging. But if it's done out of love and support, I think it's necessary and important. That's what we want our friends to do.
Absolutely.
On the Palestinian side, I did meet a few times, go to Ramallah, and heard from Prime Minister Fayyad and some business leaders and other people. For them, the sense of urgency is really immense. They feel the time is running out to be able to hold this status quo, which continues to be, and these are words that in America are seen to be are hard words to hear or say, and people challenge it. But in Israel and Middle East, nobody denies that there is an occupation. Okay. There's a military occupation in the territories in the West Bank, and still, even though the Israeli government military got out of Gaza, still controlling the borders and a lot of the power and water and things like that in Gaza. That a sense of it's just a deep distrust, and as someone who works on peace, that when there's distrust and there's fear, then that leads oftentimes to violence. And the challenge that we face is that every time there's a violent act, and there is that draws people back from the table and brings the extreme voices back to the forefront. I really do hope and pray that just this week, Prime Minister Netanyahu invited President Abbas to speak in the Knesset and said he would be willing to go to Ramallah. I'm not totally sure whether that's political theater or whether that's a real honest offer. The government in Israel is challenging because it's a coalition, not like here in America. So the Prime Minister has to work to keep his coalition, and there's several in his current coalition party, in the Jewish Home Party, Naftali Bennett, and even in his own Likud party, that making two-state solution and making a peace agreement is not what they
Easy.
want to do. Really not what they want to do. And there are those in the Palestinian faction, they still have not reconciled with Hamas, that makes this very challenging. But I think that the parameters are there, and the Palestinians and the Israelis, there are plenty of Palestinians and Israelis who want to end this conflict.
Absolutely. I think when you go back in history, it's really amazing to the essence that for years, the Jews and Arabs lived together in peace and harmony. They worked together. They built together. And of course, gradually, I feel that world powers got involved, and for their own interests, they created separation, and of course, the rest is history. And from your involvement with the children, that is so keen, that I truly honor you, what are the points of the children from both sides? What do they say? What do they feel?
You know, unfortunately today, many Israeli children don't know Palestinian children. Many Palestinian children don't know Israeli children. There's been great work, you know, Seeds of Peace organization. My dear friend Ronit Avni, who founded an organization called Just Vision, and doing education work, has made connections with, you know, kids. Kids have a brilliant and beautiful way of, before they get too old, of not seeing barriers. You know, kids put down a soccer ball, throw out some coloring, and they can find ways. You know, they'll be together. They don't have to see difference. You know, at the same time, we know kids can be quite mean to each other. But I think, by nature, that we find commonality. That the children kids. Palestinian children and parents, Israeli children and parents, they want their kids to grow up. They want them to have a home. They want them to go to school. They want them to learn. They want them to have fun. They want them to see the world. You know, what I see from talking to kids is that they get frustrated that the adults don't seem to be acting like adults. Whenever I teach kids, I find, you know, we often say, "Oh, don't act like a kid." In this case, sometimes it would be better for adults to see through the eyes of children. It might help.
There was an organization a few years ago who worked through United Nations by bringing the Israeli children and the Gaza children together in the summer. And I was asked basically to go and teach. And I'd love to have done that, but unfortunately my timing was wrong. I was involved in some other activities. And what they said, the first time the two sides got together, the children had some type of a prejudice, like prejudice.
Yeah,
from learning from the parents.
Sure.
And they would not even come in contact.
Sure.
But after the summer was over, they became brothers, they became sisters, they traveled to the United States to show the elder people that it does work, because that's really the common ground. Yeah. If you start from children at a young age, teach them the value of peace, harmony, love, overcome hate, prejudice, violence, children will grow up with God's blessing to become peaceful people.
Yes.
And that is the problem that we exist today. Not so much children, is the parents who continue to teach the children what is not right.
So one of the challenges of the many challenges, is that we see, and this is as a Jewish person, see a struggle that the extremism on both sides tends to be quite daunting. And when we hear about, you know, Arab children, Palestinian children being taught, you know, to hate Israel, being taught in their school books, and, you know, and it's not all, there's a lot of gray area, but we are wrestling. I don't want to be on record as not saying that does bother me, that when we see pictures of kids dressed in suicide vests and dressed in, you know, with weapons, that makes a big imprint on them. And but there are so many people in the Arab world that I think are trying, but it's still dangerous for them. And one of the things I learned that, you know, it's easy to say here in America, but being over there in Israel is as much as we want to, Israel is still a Middle Eastern country, and it lives in the Middle East, which is not Western. And so the sense of going, and there is still a lot of fear and repression in the Arab world. That one of the things I've talked about with some leaders is that the Jewish community went through a reformation. The Christian community went through a reformation, meaning they stood up to extremism, and the religious tones of our texts and our leadership went through a time where we figured out ways to bring it into modernity. The Arab world needs to go through their reformation, and it should not be scary or dangerous to be able to say, I support peace, to say I want to engage with the world. I mean, the Arab world was the height of the golden age, was the height of where we learned math and science and art. And I know plenty of Arab leaders who are struggling to regain that, and who struggle because they're extremists on their side, and they know that they have something. It's a very small portion, but they make a lot of noise. Absolutely. And so if we can get children to, so challenge on the other side is that the Arab, the Palestinian children, for a lot of them, they see Israelis in uniform and soldiers, and that they don't have enough interaction.
Well, I'm sure with people such as you, Joshua, and working and trying to show through your love and your God-blessed feelings, I'm sure one day we will have peace, not only in Israel, but throughout the world. I want to thank you so much for coming in on a show. It's been an honor and pleasure, and I truly mean that because I know how active you are, as you indicated, but I wish to God we had more time to expand on.
I appreciate it. I'm happy to come back.
It's been my pleasure.
Thanks, Nat.
Ladies and gentlemen, Rabbi Greder is truly a blessed individual that God has given to us because we did not have enough time to expand further, but he does so much for peace, justice, and so much more that, as I indicated, it's going to take me days to expand on. But I truly hope that from the message you get from us today is every one of us need to do something. It doesn't start with everyone, it starts with one person, but hopefully expands to all of us. I mean, every one of us have to do something for future, especially if you have children and grandchildren, because they are the future of this country and the world, and we must do what we can do to invest in them for future. Thank you for tuning in, and have a wonderful day.